For our next panel, we'll welcome the standardization executives from the military departments to share with you their strategic direction for standardization within their components and how they support the warfighter. Within the Department of Defense, each military department has a designated standardization executive responsible for assisting in the development and implementation of DSP policies and procedures. They also serve as a member of the Defense Standardization Council. And today you'll hear from the Army's, Navy's, and Air Force's standardization executives. It's Mr. Nathan Godwin, the Principal Deputy and Deputy Chief of Staff G3 for the Army. Ms. Joan Johnson, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for RDT&E for the Navy. And Ms. Kristen Baldwin, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Science, Technology, and Engineering, and a past Defense Standardization Executive. I would like to invite the standardization executives to deliver their presentations at this time, and if time permits, again, we'll answer questions posed by the audience at the end. Mr. Godwin, over to you.
Mr. Godwin, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Hey, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the Army or in the world or in the Navy or any of our allies. My name's Nate Godwin. I am the Deputy G3 in Army Materiel Command, and I am the Army Standards Officer. And for the next few minutes, I just want to talk to you about the efforts and challenges and opportunities that we in the Army are taking in order to make standardization more viable and more visible. We start into here and we talk about efforts. First and foremost, we established a triad now, and that triad is between the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology, Ms. Jeanette Evans-Morgus, Army Futures Command and the Combat Capabilities Development Command, Mr. John Willison, and myself, in order to manage expectations and manage the standardization program within the Army. As a part of this, we're updating DA policy, specifically Army Regulation 70-1, and the purpose of it is to lay out roles, responsibilities, and processes to enable us to see and have visibility over the standards that we're using as we're bringing equipment into the Army, and then over the life cycle of that equipment to ensure that we are maximizing commercial standards where possible and only using military specs when absolutely essential. But then as we go over the life cycle of that equipment, if and where we should transition from mil specs back to commercial specs because they're now available and usable, is to manage that process and ensure that we're doing it. We are revamping how we're executing our roles and responsibilities between the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, Technology, and Army Futures Command and AMC because of the way we are now organized in the Army and with the emergence of Army Futures Command, whereas Army Futures Command is looking at that equipment that's going to be coming into the Army 5 years and out. The ASAult is the one that is acquiring and fielding and ensuring that they're built to standards. And then we in Army Materiel Command, once the equipment is fielded, we are maintaining it in our depots and ensuring that we maintain its viability for use by soldiers. So one of the things that we want to do is in our efforts is we're going through and revising our policies and our regulations and amongst the triad is to maximize commercial use of standards. Why? Because we feel that it is most effective to building the military commercial partnership, and it is most effective to ensuring a viable lifetime of equipment. And many times in the Army, it's not 2 or 3 years, but it's 20, 30 years or even longer that we have this equipment within the Army. And by having commercial standards rather than military standards, we're better able to stay in touch with the commercial sector with respect to innovations that they make with respect to equipment and mechanical engineering and standards that come in, and we feel it also improves the relationship between the government and the commercial standards. So, one, we want to comply with law. 2, we want to comply with DoD, but most importantly, we want to work hand in hand with the commercial sector to ensure that the equipment we're building has one common standard as much as possible and minimize the use of our military standards. Challenges. The Army is faced with a number of challenges. As you know, as I stated, we have equipment that stays in the Army for 20 and 30 years or more. And as a result, it's important that we have common standards that we can use across the Army and across the civil sector, because so many times we also leverage the civil sector or commercial sector in our maintenance support capabilities. So as we go forward, what we're trying to do with our roles, responsibilities, and processes is put in place forums or in the process wherein we are reviewing with the experts what are the standards, why are we using those standards, and when MIL standards are being proposed, that we're reviewing and ensuring that there are senior leaders overseeing the decisions to ensure that we only use MIL standards when absolutely necessary. And I will put a shout out to our engineers and to our people who are in the acquisition, and they do a tremendous job in using commercial standards and minimizing military standards. But it is an area that we can do better, and it is an area in which we need to improve our visibility. So we're taking a look at it, and it's not just in equipment, but it goes into IT, and it goes into heraldry, and it goes into a number of other areas, which, as I was researching for this and taking on this job, the breadth of standards is not just with nuts and bolts, but it crosses the entire spectrum of everything that we do in the Army. So as we go forward, we're looking at minimizing military and improving our commercial use of standards. The other thing is our challenge is centralization and decentralization. How do we centralize the guidance, the policy, and the promulgation of resources, and then centralize to what degree in order to have the visibility to ensure that we are adhering to the spirit of the law and to the maximization. So that is something that we're working through, and as I mentioned earlier, one of our as we update our policies and regulations, it's how we implement and insert some forums wherein we will have visibility on what standards are being approved for new equipment coming into the Army. And then the other is compliance across equipment's life cycle. We have equipment that has been in service for a while, and when we first brought the equipment in, there was not a commercial standard. So we're going back and looking at, okay, how do we then identify that there's now a commercial standard and move away from a MIL standard to commercial standard, especially when it's coming back into our depots for overhaul or repair, so that we can begin to minimize some of the MIL standards that we used when there were not commercial standards, where there was not commercial equipment available to meet that need. So that's the other challenge that we're working through. So opportunities, what kind of opportunities do we have? Well, we have a lot. One is we're doing our equipment acquisition. It is working with the commercial vendors who are the original manufacturers to ensure that we are meeting the proper standards that our equipment requires, and that we're reviewing side by side with them. Okay, here's what we need. This is why we need it. And if there's a commercial standard, that allowing the commercial sector to develop that standard rather than using just a military spec. A second part of it is we're looking at, well, not looking at, but Ms. Jeanette Evans Morgus and team are building a compendium, a standards compendium for use by our program managers, so that when they are beginning to develop the specs, that they have a compendium to refer back to ensure that we're making the correct decision starting at the very beginning. The other is the publishing of a digital desktop reference. We've learned that, you know, our program managers out there who are working, they don't have a quick reference, so we're building a desktop reference that they can work to and use to guide them in making decisions with our PMs and engineers. And then lastly, what we're looking at is implementing it across the Army. Is once we get the standards compendium built and the desktop reference built, is then expanding it into our program managers, our program executive officers, into our life cycle management commands at the depots, and into our maintenance facilities, so that we are using it and applying these standards and across the spectrum of what we're doing. And as I said, it's not just equipment. It's information technology. It's medical equipment, it's heraldry, it goes into packaging and storaging and storing, soldier systems and testing and evaluation. So as we in the Army were moving forward, we formed a triad to attack some of the challenges that we've uncovered in order to unify our efforts across the entire spectrum to ensure that we're using the correct standards at the correct time for the correct piece of equipment or information technology that we're using in order to further the links and bonds between not just the Army, but within the Army, but also with the commercial sector and those in the commercial sector that build so much of our tremendous equipment that we provide to our soldiers for use in the defense of our freedom. So with that, I appreciate having a few minutes to talk to you about what we in the Army are doing, but that's the direction that we're going. And again, I thank you. And once all the other presentations are completed, I'll be available for any questions you may have. So thank you very much.